Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We still have got a few folk making their way in from the waiting room, so let's give them a moment and we'll all get settled in and start very soon. Terrific. Well, I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional lands of many different First Nations people. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm joining you from today, which is the Yarriambiack land, and their continued connection with the land, waters and community. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and walk alongside the children who will become our future elders. Also, thank you to any First Nations people who are joining us here tonight. My name is Jacqui Emery. I'm the CEO of Royal Far West, and I have the great honour of facilitating this evening's conversation. Royal Far West is a specialist child development service that has gifted healthcare to country children for 100 years. 5x5's call to make early childhood education and care accessible to all children, no matter where they live, is vitally important to our ambition that every country child has access to the services they need to support their early development and enrich their life. I'm really excited about tonight's event because not only are we going to hear directly from rural parents and educators from around Australia, we're also joined by the Minister for Regional Development, Kristy McBain, and the Shadow Minister from the National Party, Darren Chester. Please join me in thanking them for taking time out of their busy schedule to chat with us here tonight. A warm welcome to you both. But before we get started, we have a little bit of housekeeping. If you'd like to introduce yourself and share the traditional country you're from in the chat, go ahead and do that now. To share questions and thoughts throughout our conversation, we're going to be using the Civility Feedback Tool. If you haven't attended an event using the feedback tool before, it's essentially a tool for everyone to engage throughout the event and stay connected. There'll be some questions for you to respond to using the feedback tool, and you can also ask your own questions there as they come up for you. It will all make sense in a minute. And that's great. We're seeing a few traditional lands come up on the chat. Great to see that. So you can either log in through your phone using the QR code on the screen or your computer using the link or details in the chat. If you're joining this Zoom call from a mobile, then the link will be in the chat and you can click directly through to the website. This will mean that you're still listening to the Zoom audio, but can use the interactive tool in your phone's browser. Jump on now and let us know you are ready to go by hitting the heart button. Just wait to see how everyone's going. Great, we've got a heart. Fantastic. And if you're having any problem getting on, you can always put your questions in the chat or ask for some tech support as well. Looks like we're getting quite a few people up and going. The speakers won't be able to respond to questions until the Q&A session at the end of tonight's conversation. You can, of course, still ask your questions, but we won't be able to get to everyone's question, but we'll try and do our best. Finally, we're recording the session tonight, so it can be uploaded later on. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, feel free to keep your video off. Okay, so let's get into our conversation tonight. And you're here, like the rest of us, because you know the impact of the early learning crisis is felt more deep in rural and remote communities. Too many rural and remote families are being forced to leave their communities because they live in childcare deserts, making accessing early learning and childcare, as well as employment, near impossible. Similarly, with little incentive to offer, early childhood educational employers in rural and remote areas struggle to recruit and retain staff, impacting the rich and diverse communities, towns and economies that make up country Australia. Clearly, the effects on rural and remote families are complex and far-reaching, and only felt more heavily in light of the current cost of living. So first up, we're curious to know how many people tonight are parents or are early childhood educators from a regional, rural or remote community. Let us know by responding to the poll in our feedback tool. Fantastic. Oh, that's fantastic. So we're getting quite a few people that are early educators. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to hear your voice. And also a lot of parents coming online as well. Oh, fantastic. And we've got some parents in the chat from Burke as well. Welcome. Fantastic. Great. Well, a great cross-section there. So we'll move on. Progress to improve access to early childhood education has been made in recent years, but the change has not been ambitious or fast enough, particularly for families and children in the regions. Country kids deserve an entitlement to quality early childhood education so they can start school ready and thrive by 5. During today's event, our panel is made up of rural parents and educators, Eloise Ferring, Peter Clarkson and Jason Cobb, who will talk about how the early learning crisis is playing out in their local communities, as well as Tammy Smith, who is the CEO of Yarriambiack, I've got that right, Tammy, Shire Council, and I'll introduce you properly to this panel very shortly. You'll then hear from Thrive by Five's Jay Weatherill and Catherine Liddle, CEO of SNAICC, about how we can move things forward for rural and remote First Nations families. But first up, Maddie Butler from advocacy organisation The Parenthood is with us, who just 2 weeks ago in Canberra launched their very own rural coalition, a network of over 50 organisations calling on the government to reform the early learning sector. Maddie will give us a quick update on the coalition. So over to you, Maddie.
Thanks, Jacqui, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm joining today from Wurundjeri country. So just to let you know, the Parenthood advocates for better policies for parents, carers and children. And last year we started a campaign calling for improved access to regional, rural and remote early childhood education and care. We released a report, Choiceless, with 166 stories and case studies from people all over the country, including Eloise, detailing their struggles with early learning and care in the regions. Time and time again, I've heard of parents putting their child's name on a wait list as soon as they're pregnant and not getting a spot until the child is over 2 years of age, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, sometimes never. I'm sure we all know what this means. Children miss out on vital educational, social, health and wellbeing benefits. Parents and carers struggle to work, and this has huge financial implications with the rising cost of living. But it also means that not only are there 2-year plus wait lists to get an early learning spot, there are 2-year plus wait lists to see the local physio or speech therapist. Hospitals and schools are understaffed. We hear of families moving away from the towns they love with all their heart because they can't access early learning and care and strike the work-life parenting balance that they deserve. So while working on this campaign, I've come across many organisations concerned about the lack of regional, rural and remote early childhood education and care, like Royal Far West, like Thrive by 5, like SNAICC and like Rural Councils Victoria. This issue affects so many different parts of society, and this is recognised by many organisations. So we formed a coalition. We've now got 53 organisations and counting to show that this issue is urgent, it's immense, and change is needed. We launched our coalition, as Jacqui said, 2 weeks ago in Canberra with a joint statement. There's 6 calls to action for the federal government in coordination with all levels of government to ensure equitable access to regional, rural and remote early learning and care. Please feel free to check out our 6 calls on our website. I won't go through them all right now, but essentially we want governments to properly manage the whole system to ensure that every single child has some form of provision, no matter where they live. We don't want one size fits all. We need tailored solutions that are developed with and for communities and recognise their unique challenges and opportunities. I'd like to thank the Minister and the Shadow Minister here tonight for meeting with us in Canberra, and I know that they take these issues very seriously. Now is the time for change. So we'll be taking the coalition and the joint statement to the states and territories from next week, and we hope to see buy-in from all levels of government and from all parties and politicians to ensure every family has some form of access. And PS, we're always collecting more stories about access in the region, so please feel free to send me an email anytime. And I'm also really sorry, I do have to jump off this session early. I have a netball game and we really need our goal defence.
Oh, thank you, Maddie. I mean, Choiceless is such a wonderful report, and if you haven't read it, the link is in the chat. I think Maddie summarised really nicely just then why universal access to early learning would be particularly important for kids and families in the bush. But the rural parents and educators who have generously agreed to share their stories can tell you about that for themselves. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel. Member of our panel is Eloise Ferring, a parent of 2 from the Yorke Peninsula, South Australia, who hasn't been able to return to her role as a high school teacher. Jason Cobb, an early childhood educator from Yarriambiack Aboriginal Child and Family Centre in Light, South Wales, and Peter Clarkson, a Centre Director from Good Start Early Learning in Kingaroy in Queensland, where she has worked for 20 years. And last but not least, Tammy Smith, CEO at Yarriambiack. I got that right in the rehearsal. Shire Council in regional Victoria, where childcare desert pervade. So, okay, let's get stuck in. Eloise, I'd like to start with you. Could you please tell us a bit about the difficulties you've experienced navigating returning to work community of Yorke Peninsula in South Australia? And maybe you could start off by just helping our audience online tonight just orient to where exactly the Yorke.
Sure, thank you, Jacqui. I am joining you from Narungga Country. So Narungga Country, Yorke Peninsula is west of Adelaide. We are a peninsula, so it's southwest. Where I am located is about 2.5 hours from Adelaide, but the longest you'd travel would be about 4, maybe 5 hours to get to the bottom of the peninsula. I don't live in a township. I live on property. I'm not a farmer. We're not farmers, but we are surrounded by farming, country and crop. So our township, closest township is about 20 minutes from where we live. And where I work, where I was working, the high school I was at was about a 50-minute drive for me. So I wasn't in the local township. I was in another township when I was a classroom teacher. So initially, when I was pregnant with my first in 2020, I was a bit naive, even though colleagues were saying get on a wait list now, because there was only one rural care option, which was affiliated with a local preschool. I just thought I'd figure it out. Of course, that wasn't the case, and I wasn't able to return to work. Within the first 12 months, it was pretty evident, but as time went on, I did have him on the wait list, but there wasn't availability before 2 years of age. And then I subsequently got pregnant with our second child, and the same thing, that then just pushed out. So the options didn't change necessarily. In fact, it was harder for under twos, and our local council was successful in getting a grant to build a purpose childcare centre in the Minlaton township, which was aiming to be open at the beginning of 2024. It is now June and it still doesn't have an opening date. I was very ambitious, hoping to get back to work, so I applied for a part-time job, not as a teacher, because the high school structure, really timetable structure, isn't conducive to part-time work. I didn't feel I'd actually be doing part-time work. So I applied for a corporate education position 2 days a week. The childcare hadn't opened, but my husband had taken long service leave, which he took out part-time over 6 months, and he returns to work in about 5 weeks, and we don't have any childcare. So it is getting to be a little bit stressful, and once it is open, it will be a game changer. But yeah, really, in terms of my career options and the flexibility, as a teacher, I really thought maybe it was there. It really isn't. My husband's workplace offered greater flexibility, and yeah, I've been at home, and not that that's been a bad experience, but it certainly has challenged my thinking around options and access, and really what it's like for us in the country.
Oh, Eloise, that sounds really tough. And, you know, I'm seeing another comment here in the chat too around this terrible juggle with family life and being able to return to work. If anyone else is out there that wants to share their story on the chat, love to hear it. Eloise, is the centre still not open due to staffing, or do you know the reason?
The actual construction isn't completed, but there is some concern around staffing, because the provider that came in had secured staffing, but of course, anecdotally, and I can't confirm this with actual confirmed information, but anecdotally, there is maybe some concern that some people couldn't wait any longer and pursued other opportunities. But we still just don't have a date. So it's that ambiguity that it isn't just affecting families wanting children in the care centre, it's affecting staffing as well. So yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword there.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter, I'd like to just throw to you now. You're a centre director in Kingaroy, Queensland. Can you tell us a bit about what running your service is like day to day? Lots of rural and remote parents tell us that centres struggle to retain educators. What do you think this is, and what's your experience in Kingaroy?
Yeah, my heart goes out to Eloise, because it's just a horrible story to hear. And I always feel a sense of, I really want to help you, but I can't, when someone comes into the centre and we place them on a wait list. Our waiting list is up to September next year at this stage. I have 34 staff. You talk about flexible working arrangements. My girls work 2 days a week, 3 days a week. I only need 16 a day. I'm open 12 hours a day. I'm a 74-place centre with 5 rooms, starting from 6 weeks of age, going up to 6. But because the childcare nowadays, compared to when I started 20-something years ago, is a lot different. There's a whole new range of complexity of skills that you are required to have to understand how to support the children and the families. You know, we've got children that need to see paediatricians. We've got families that need DV support, or are away from country and have no connection. There's lots of things we deal with nowadays that we've never had to deal with before. our staff members are suffering from vicarious trauma from always dealing with children that have trauma backgrounds, and they need to have a break, you know. So we're very flexible with our working arrangements, but my day starts at 6 a.m. when my open staff will tell me how many staff are away today and how we're going to support our ratios within the centre to make sure that we are open. We don't close our doors because we don't have enough staff. It just means myself as management and my assistant director and maybe in the receptionist are in helping each other and helping the team run their rooms and run to ratio. Our problem is the ones that are here for the long term and have been here for a while and want to be here, but trying to get our younger team members involved as role models, etc. They can name their price to be an NDIS worker, where NDIS places are popping up everywhere. You know, I'm getting paid $85 an hour. Good on you. I've never seen $85 an hour. So they just leave and they don't need to do any special skill set. They've already got the skill set from having done their certificate or diploma. So keeping them attached to the role is a problem. We need to make sure that the pay needs to reflect the complexity of skills that the educators now have. We are no longer the babysitters, we are educators, and it's taken us a very long time in this industry to go from that mindset of people, oh, you're just the babysitters, or they're just going for a play and then they'll come home. And, you know, the amount of work we've done in that learning through play space and getting schools ready for us, not us ready for school, has been in that early years focus, a huge undertaking for us all in the education sector. Even having teachers recognise that we have skills as well, we're not the babysitters, has been a big push. So, you know, there's not too many job roles out there that you undergo DV support training, vicarious trauma training, first aid for suicide training. You know, like, we do a lot of work that is unheard of 20 years ago. So our pay needs to reflect what we don't receive at the moment.
Oh, thank you, Peter. That's well done to you, because it's a really tough job being a centre director in a rural and remote area, and I'm sure at times it feels like a thankless task, and but you're just doing an amazing job. Can you just tell again the audience where, for those of us that don't know where Kingaroy is, exactly where it is in Queensland?
Well, you might know where we are, but you know what we do, because we are the peanut capital and the navy bean capital of Australia, as well as the pork, and getting right into Swickers and Sun Pork. But we are 3 hours northwest of Brisbane, or Meanjin, in Queensland. So yeah, you go up a bit and then across. And we're on the way to many places, but we're just a little rural country town. Lots of peanut silos, lots of navy bean silos, which is where your baked beans come from, and a huge bacon processing factory.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. And if there's any Queensland parents online, we'd love to hear your story as well. So thank you both, Eloise and Peter. Now I'll throw to you, Jason. You're also a centre director at Walnabar Durali Aboriginal Child and Family Centre in Lightning Ridge. Does what Peter described resonate for you as well? And could you tell us a little bit more about your centre and where it is and the unique challenges that you face?
Hi, yes, I'm Jason Cobb from Lightning Ridge, home of the Black Opal on the Urallaway land in northern New South Wales, if that gives an idea of where we are. We're exactly the same as Peter. Same issues when it comes to the staffing. Why wouldn't they just stay with us? But yeah, when they're offering more money, I can see why they go. A lot of same issues I've written down here that I've got the same. And training for our staff is an issue out here just because of our ruralness and remoteness. Face-to-face learning is how we know works for our people out here, whereas we have to sign up to TAFE Digital or something to get our people qualified out here. So it's a bit of a joke. It's affecting the whole community. Impact the preschool in the last 2 weeks, the local preschool of 35 years had to close its doors due to no staff or staff on maternity leave that were back in July. But yeah, then they'll have to look at more staff. Recruitment is a big thing out here as well. Getting the staff, keeping the staff, it's all very hard unless you've got a really attractive wage to keep them here. We offer a lot of wraparound supports to our families with our PAC program and family support program. Yeah, we have a lot of difficulty accessing child services, as is speeches and stuff like that. I really can't say much more because Peter covered it all.
Jason, what does it do to a community like yours when a preschool just shuts like that? What's the impact?
It's a massive impact, especially for some of the kids that attend there. Now it puts more strain on our centre to pick up what kids may be able to come to our centre. We have a waiting list of 12 and we're only a 24-place centre. We can't up our numbers until we have a qualified ECT on site more hours. So we're at a sort of a rock and a hard place where we want to up our numbers to take on the preschools load that while they're but at what cost, you know? Do we have an ECT? No. We've got one at the moment that SNAICC is providing. Thank you, SNAICC. Other than that, we'd be in the same boat as they are too. It's a sad fact that ECTs, educators and all that aren't recognised for the skills they provide with our, not just on the floor with the kids and that, but with the families and the supports and ideas and things they give to families is a big thing. Like Peter said, they're not recognised enough with their salary.
Yeah, and Jason, are you finding that the complexities for children and families has increased?
Yes, increases, you know, of difficult behaviours. A lot of increase for family supports because of the dollar we know is not going as far as it used to. But we are targeting young. We do target the school-based trainees, which does, you know, some do stick around. 1 in 3 will probably stick around. That's our estimate. We're happy to get 1 out of that. And then they're sad figures, you know, like they really are, when we should be able to train people and retain staff that are local people with that local knowledge.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jason. Tammy, Yarriambiack, I've lost that one now. You can pronounce it for me. You're the CEO, and you're dealing with multiple compounding issues, at which the root is a lack of early childhood education. It made the news a few months back that a centre in Hopetoun in your Shire had to shut its doors. Can you tell us a bit about the impact on the local town's economy, the sense of community, and some of the biggest challenges that you face in addressing this?
Thank you, Jacqui. And I'm joining from Weatherill country, and it's Yarriambiack. So Hopetoun is 400 kilometres northwest of Melbourne, and it's considered a major service centre for the Southern Mallee, and it has a population of around 694 people. So it just sort of puts into context where we're located. So we did have a childcare operator. So Yarriambiack operates the kindergarten program. And then we had a separate childcare provider, and that was a not-for-profit organisation that operated across Victoria and Tasmania. And in April this year, they had to close their doors, and to no fault of their own, unfortunately, they lost their service leader, and then it had a flow-on impact in the sense that they actively tried to recruit and couldn't retain a new staff member, and they had to close their doors in April. Now we're now in June and they still have been unable to recruit, and they've, you know, actively gone through interview processes, and we've been on the radio and we've done active advertising campaigns to support them from a council perspective, and we still haven't been able to assist them to secure staff. Now it's got to June, and the hope, initially we had hope within the community. There was a lot of hope that, okay, everybody was getting behind this active recruitment campaign, and that hope has now dwindled, and we're really starting to see that social and emotional impact within the community. So, and there's also the economic impact on parents not being able to return to work. So what we're finding is we have a local health service. So they're struggling in the sense that now they've got reduced staffing because, you know, people can't get childcare. So therefore, families are less able to attend work. They have to reduce their rostering hours, and the health service is already under significant strain in our rural community because they've had to close their urgent care because they can't get staff, and now it's being further compounded. We've also seen it impacting our local schools. So we have 2 schools within Hopeton. One's a P12 and the other one's the Catholic school. And we're seeing that it's impacting their rostering because staff, you know, the schools obviously, I shouldn't say rostering, it's timetabling, but the school timetable based on the available staff. And then what's happened is some of those staff members have lost you know, childcare, and effectively they've got to try and work around getting childcare and trying to manage their ability to attend work. So it's impacting the schools. Similarly, it's impacting our council. So we have a large depot in our Hopeton area that does the northern end of our shire. And yes, it's predominantly a male workforce, but they're also parents, and they also duly look after their children and care for their children, and they're having a significant impact on who's going to care for the children, and then trying to balance that. We're also seeing now there's significant financial stress from this. So we are getting more and more families coming to us saying, you know, we can't pay our rates. Can we go on payment plans? We're worried about the financial impact. Not sure if anybody's seen that we had Heather from Beulah. She was in the Weekly Times recently, and she talked about the lack of childcare and the fact that they may have to move because they can't get childcare, like she can't, and her family can't get childcare within the region. So we're seeing it, and we're seeing this overarching social and emotional impact in our community because it's not just impacting the direct parents, it's also impacting the grandparents, because grandparents are often, or the family members, picking up and helping to assist to look after the children. And, you know, they often have holidays planned, they have other, you know, activities that they may be doing. So it's impacting on their ability to, you know, participate in active recreation and lifestyle choices as well. And, you know, when we think about the barriers and what's impacting early childhood education and care in our rural setting, I think Eloise and Peter and Jason hit the nail on the head. It's the fact that we've got a skills shortage across all of Australia effectively for professionals. And we're competing in a rural and regional setting against metropolitan providers, and, you know, and effectively sometimes metropolitan wages, because some of the for-profit entities can pay more. And so we've got that challenge. We don't have the market in which for-profit providers will come in to rural and regional areas. It's just not viable. And so, and even for not-for-profits, it's not overly viable. So, you know, there needs to be we do need to pay our educators more. There needs to be more funding, and to recognise the professionals that they are, and what the value that they provide to our community. And also, we need to consider, you know, the funding that's available for rural services. That needs to be increased, because there is market failure and we can't attract, you know, for profit, and even it needs to be viable for not for profit. So yeah, I think, you know, we're all on the same path there. You know, we all value our educators and teachers, and we believe that they definitely should be paid more.
It really is. Thank you, Tammy. Like it really is a crisis and a very widespread one. I'm interested to know, with so many rural and remote parents and educators online tonight, how listening to our speakers talk made you feel. Please let us know using the word cloud in our feedback tool. This is really important feedback. We really want to share your voice. The details to join that will be available in the chat. Yeah, I mean, it does feel overwhelming, doesn't it? Frustrated, yes. Hopeful, hopeful that we're having this conversation, I suppose. It's really important and great that our ministers are here listening to all of this and stories directly. Again, I think some of the stories that are coming through the chat are just incredible. We really need to hear your voice. So please keep them coming and share your stories as we continue our conversation. Yes, look, frustrated keeps keep coming up there. Validated. I think that's the thing. I think you're all hearing that this is very widespread. You're all struggling with the same sorts of issues, you know, worried about the future of rural Australia. I think I saw that come at Rural Futures, absolutely, and sad. So that's right. But again, you know, possibly very hopeful that finally we might be able to get change and some changes in policy that will. So thank you very, very much. So now I'm really keen to hear from our other speakers, Jay and Catherine, having heard the stories from our community members. What kind of policies and ideas do you think should be guiding our solutions? And I'll go to you, Jay.
Of the Whadjuk people here in the Noongar Nation in East Fremantle, actually. And I suppose the rural and regional areas have always been sort of a bit of a canary in the sort of coal mine. So when something goes wrong in a system, it's more likely to manifest itself in some of these communities. And I think we're seeing that two things that just leap out at me through this conversation is that early education and care is now an essential service. It's not only essential for the health and well-being of children, but also for the way in which rural and regional communities function and operate. And the old solutions of just handing people a voucher and expecting them to shop around and hope that they can find a service and hope that those services are viable enough to continue is just a bit of an old model. It's never really worked that well in the bush, but to the extent that it did work, it's not universal. It doesn't work everywhere. It certainly doesn't work in remote Aboriginal communities. It barely works in cities. There are still big slabs of towns in that it doesn't work in. So I think we need a different model where I think governments step up and take much more responsibilities for outcomes. So it's not adequate now to say, here's a voucher, go away and shop for your childcare. We need them to say, you've got a right to your child to actually have this education. And we're going to make sure that this can be delivered wherever you live in this country, whatever your circumstances are, whatever your wage is, whatever the challenges you might face. It shouldn't matter. And I think it's a different way. I mean, I think we got to the point with public policy, and both major parties were involved in this over the 80s, 90s and 2000, where we thought it was adequate to sort of create a market, you know, and the funding is not trivial. I mean, there's about $13 billion of funding. It's not as though government isn't doing a fair bit of heavy lifting, but it's just not enough to actually make sure that this is delivered everywhere and to the quality that's necessary. So we just basically want people to take responsibility for outcomes. It's not enough to stand back and say, well, look, we've done all we can here. We want them to accept responsibility for making sure that children have their needs met. And that will be difficult it will be difficult in some places. It's going to mean a very different response in, you know, downtown Melbourne than it will be in the middle of remote Aboriginal communities in the middle of Australia. There'll be a very different response. But that doesn't, you don't just set up a solution that just covers part of Australia. You need to actually think through a differentiated response that might be quite different in different parts of this country. So I think that's what we're looking for is a universal entitlement, and then that's when the hard work begins. What does it mean to actually deliver that? What does it mean to get these people out to remote regions? And it might be we've got to use our imaginations about how we attract and retain people in these communities.
Thanks, Jay. And Catherine, to you, talk us through what SNAICC is seeing and hearing from our First Nations community.
Oh, there's so much I want to say, and there's just not enough time. But the first thing I'll do, of course, is acknowledge I'm sitting on the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung mob in Victoria. And I have waited so long to be able to say that word because I just find it fascinating. Dja Dja Wurrung. These mob are pretty deadly, and so is the landscape around me. I think one of the things that you've all talked about has been rooted in story, and the importance of telling those stories can't be underestimated, because stories frame how policy lands. And I know I've heard all of you mention policy to a point there, because everything we're talking about is absolutely rooted in policy. And when we think about the bigger picture, if we're not investing in early education and care, not only are we having those impacts that we're seeing on economic development and women being able to engage, but we also see the impacts of that failure to invest in early childhood further down the track, which then, compound all of the types of problems that we've all been talking about and hearing about today. And when we talk about regional and remote areas, and I noticed someone mentioning on the fringes of towns as well, that's really, really important, because often where we've seen people get pushed out into those fringes, again, the policy settings haven't caught up. The infrastructure and the architecture that you need for people living in those areas where we're moving out because the cost of living is so high, that infrastructure is not built. So you are going to see the compound impacts of failure to invest at the right time in those areas as well. What we know is that the current funding model certainly doesn't take into account the scope or the complexity of the needs of many, many children, in particular Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families, and those sitting on the fringes of cities, those in regional, remote and very remote areas. They are dealing with a set of complexities that most people can't comprehend. So we know that fundamentally funding needs to be overhauled. We've heard Jay talk about it just then when he was speaking about the market-driven models. They don't work in areas like regional and remote areas because the market is too thin. There just isn't enough people. And they certainly don't work for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, and probably very few children at all. We've heard, even from Jason when he was talking about the AFCs that he works with, some of those issues, but they mirrored the issues in the other services. But what we know about our regional and remote services that's really specialise in looking after Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, they are working slightly differently in that they also put culture at the heart of everything. They also put those nuances that say, we love you. And I know that all childcare services really invest in those relationships with children and feel that heart connection to children. But when we're talking about these particular services, they're usually an auntie or an uncle or a nana as well. So you get a whole different layer of engagement, and you see families start to follow their children, follow footsteps, so that you actually get multi-generational service delivery at the same time. We know that our services, they're not just minding children, and I know I've seen it coming up into the comments. These aren't, that it gets confused with just a place to put children, and it's not. We're talking about an incredibly valuable workforce, an incredibly valuable workforce. The people that invest in our children, that help strengthen their self-esteem, that help work on how they identify themselves and ensure that our children have what they need to be successful once they leave those settings and move into you know, those really institutionalized spaces of schools. We also know, and we've heard it from everyone who's presented today, that in particular, when we're talking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander services, they help parents and family members navigate systems like Centrelink. Often there isn't a computer at home, or there is a lack in digital literacy, or let's be honest, a lot of those systems are really, really complex and not accessible. We know they also act as an entry point for other services, and we've heard that already online, like family violence support. And a lot of these services, they might be hard to get to, but sometimes, you know, those words we use when we talk about cultural safety, sometimes people do not feel comfortable going into those services. Again, when we're talking about access to healthcare, those services that we have where it's integrated, you're not going into a white building where you have to go past a receptionist, where you have to navigate things that you're a little bit scared of. That healthcare provision is provided to you within the safety of a service where you're watching your children play. It's a whole different framework. We also know that they deliver gaps that have been left by mainstream government services and organisations. And in doing that, they create a real sense of community. And I guess one of the easier ways to describe that would be when we see, and I'm sure it's not only isolated to Aboriginal community controlled services, but when there are times of disaster, it is often the childcare service that has the capacity to bring in food. And for many families, when there has been significant flooding or fire, that might be the only meal available to any family at any point in time. When we've seen things like COVID outbreaks, sometimes that's the only place where our families have felt safe enough to go in and say, what is happening? How do we access it? Do we want this in the first place? And how do we get it now that we've thought about it? Well, how do we actually get vaccinations, and what do we tell our families? So they play these fundamental roles in linking our people to the world around them. One of the things we've been doing recently in SNAICC is really pushing the boundaries on what funding should look like. How should these services be developed, and what should they deliver? So we've recently published a report that was commissioned by the Early Childhood Care and Development Policy Partnership. That's a lot of words, but that's where we get all the states and territories and the Commonwealth together in the same room and really nut out how we can look at a different service system. The report essentially recommends moving away from a funding model based primarily on the childcare subsidy to a dedicated and more sustainable model for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community-controlled services. Now, as you'd all know, under the childcare subsidy, funding is attached to the child, and this has essentially created an inequitable system. The people most affected by this inequitable system have been Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families and single parents. We know that families are eligible for less subsidised hours of care simply because of the activity test, and they're often the families that need this incredible resource the most. We know that even with the recent increases in the hourly access for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, it's still a massive barrier. With all the evidence that we have, and with all the stories that people like yourselves are so generously sharing, we know that it is absolutely vital that we invest in the early years, not only for now, but for the development of our children and our families and ultimately our communities. The idea that children should be denied education because of their parents' circumstances is absolutely abhorrent. It perpetuates inequality and it embeds injustice. We desperately need a new funding model that provides for the wraparound supports that families need to ensure that all children are able to thrive in their early years. And fundamental to that is that the activity test has to go.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And I know that this the Thrive by 5 community of partners are right behind that. I'd like to thank all of our fantastic panellists. I think we hear it loud and clear. Universal access to early childhood education would change the lives of parents, families, educators, workplaces, and entire communities in rural and remote Australia. So what do our federal leaders have to say about their priorities for the early learning system? in regional, rural and remote communities. Over to you, Minister McBain, and then I'll follow up with you, Shadow Minister Chester.
Well, thank you so much for having both myself and Darren along to your Zoom tonight. I think it's an incredibly important topic, and listening to the two panels and also reading some of the stories in the chat, I can absolutely relate. It's something that I'm hearing when I'm travelling around the country, as well as in my own electorate across Eden and Arrow. Stories very similar to the ones we've heard tonight, both from parents and families, but also from the sector themselves, particularly around attracting and retaining staff. So I think it's really important that we're hearing from both sides in regards to some of the challenges that are there. Clearly, the government believes that every family should have access to early childhood education and care, no matter where they live, no matter what the circumstances are. And we're working towards a universal early childhood education and care system that is affordable, accessible and inclusive. And by universal, we mean not just affordable, but something that you are able to access where you live. It doesn't really matter if we subsidise childcare if you don't have access to it where you are, because that is not going to make a difference to you. But we need to be clear that regional undersupply of childcare options is not a problem that's appeared overnight. It's something we've been challenged with now for a long period of time, and something that we do need to fix. There's been inaction, I guess, in parts of the sector that we really need to address, including through dealing with the pay of what our early childhood educators are currently receiving for the amazing job that they're doing. And having said that, my own 3 kids went through SNAICC, so I know that this is not those educators become part of your extended family, and that's the way that I always thought of the people that were educating my children when they went through there. We are obviously meeting with a range of people, and only a couple of weeks ago I sat down with Maddie in the Early Childhood Education Minister's office, and I've met with Jay before, and we've heard from many parents, as I said, across the place. We're making some progress, but there's always more to do. The cheaper childcare measures that we put in place have helped about 1 million families, including about 265,000 people across regional Australia. And we're making sure that we can keep regional services open and stay open through targeted funding. There's been about $614 million provided through the Community Childcare Fund, which has included connected beginnings to support access to early childhood education across Australia. And about 70% of that goes to rural and regional communities. There's been a round of Community Childcare Fund, about $84 million to support SNAICC services who are supporting disadvantaged and vulnerable communities, which has been really important. Successful applicants for that last round will be announced very soon. We also recognise that we need to work in partnership with First Nations people to ensure that SNAICC is culturally safe as well. And that's why we're providing around $16 million to the Secretariat of the National Aboriginal and Islander Childcare in core funding to deliver on childhood outcomes under the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. And just last month, we announced some funding for some new childcare centres under the Growing Regions Fund in both Cloncurry in Queensland and Loxton in South Australia. But as I said, that's only so much at this point, and we know that there is so much more to be able to do. And I think, to be frank, we've got to really call out that the traditional for-profit model does not work in parts of our country. And we know that the workforce challenges remain. That's why some time ago, our government commissioned 2 comprehensive inquiries into the SNAICC system, one being undertaken by the ACCC and the other by the Productivity Commission. the ACCC has delivered its final report, which will inform the Productivity Commission's final report, which is due next month. I think the ACCC was really clear that there is no one-size-fits-all approach, and I think that's what we've heard loud and clear tonight again, is that we really have to nuance our approaches in the ECEC sector depending on where we are in the country. And at the moment, that for-profit model basically means that we're seeing a bunch of centres pop up in high population metropolitan areas who are pulling, I guess, the workforce in different locations than where we want. And they are able to, you know, get a bunch of kids in those centres, but we're missing out in parts of the country where we actually have a high demand, but those a lot of those for-profit providers don't think that they can earn as much as they can in some of our capital cities, which is really pulling apart that model. So I think we've got to be clear that there is more that needs to be done so that, you know, there are different models depending on where we are in the country. We've also done some reviews into Commonwealth programs that have regional impact, so in-home care, how the childcare fund is restricted in an inclusion support program, which will also feed into that last PC report. And we'll be guided by the ACCC and the PC as we chart a course to universal ECEC, including for country kids and families living in rural and remote parts of the country. In terms of next steps, I'm really happy to follow up with my colleagues, Anne Ali and Jason Clare, on some of the specific issues that have been raised tonight. And one that is always really loud and clear is that funding for teachers, which is really important. We want our kids to have access to quality childcare services delivered in a way that meets families' needs at a price that is affordable. And it's important to recognise that childcare is really important for childhood development, but it's also really important for regional economic development. There's an economic way that we can look at this, and a lot of the Scandinavian countries do look at it in economic terms. If it's good for children and it's good for parents, it'll be good for the economy as well. And I think we are moving towards a better understanding that early childhood education is really important to grow our economy as well. I want to say a big thank you to Thrive by Five for the work that they've been doing in highlighting the issues, because I think for a long period of time it was seen as the family's responsibility, and in many cases it was the woman's responsibility to deal with early childhood education. It's now a mainstream topic, and you've got political parties who are really keen to actually make a difference in this space, and I think that's really important to call out the work that has been done by Thrive by Five and the Parenthood in actually making this a mainstream topic now. And you can see from the amount of people on this Zoom that everyone is really keen and interested. So thank you for sharing really honestly people's views, and stories in the chat are really quite compelling. And I know that this is a busy time of night for everyone, trying to get dinner done and kids through the bath and bed routine. So thanks for taking the time out to come to this Zoom tonight for everyone there. And I'll leave my comments there, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Kristy. Over to you, Darren.
Thanks for that. Just making sure that I unmute myself. And I'm going to disappoint everyone who was hoping that there'd be fireworks between Kristy and myself tonight, because I agree with, I think, 99.9% of what Kristy said. I'll try and find one fault at some other point, Kristy, but thank you for your presentation, and thanks for being available tonight. I understand the pressures of being a minister and the time travels involved, and I hope to be one again one day at your expense, so we'll look forward to that. On a serious note, I just want to point out a really simple point, first of all, that we do live in the greatest nation in the world, and we should be very hopeful and optimistic about our capacity to solve these problems. I live 4 hours from Melbourne, a little town called Lakes Entrance, about 6,000 people. I've been lucky enough to bring my own children up there. A little bit of childcare is involved, but in those days wasn't much available to us. So we tended to have to rely on kinship care, family care, whatever you want to call it, and we muddled our own way through. A bit of a hybrid model. It all worked perfectly until someone got sick and it all fell apart. So that's pretty typical for a lot of people in country areas. On an optimistic point, can I thank you all for being available tonight? And like Kristy, I really do value your input. You need to take some comfort from the fact that people like Jay and Maddie have been coming to Canberra, have been advocating very strongly and making your case. And the issue is very much on the agenda, and that's something I think you should take credit for as advocates, that there is a focus now on the issues. Kristy has quite rightly outlined all the different challenges, but there is a capacity within Canberra, within the halls of power, particularly amongst the regional MPs, to try and work in a collaborative sense to overcome some of the issues you've described tonight. I think shaping the debate right now is the question around cost of living. It's the number one issue facing all Australian families, and shaping your input into the policy-making process that is Canberra around the question of cost of living links into every other issue you've made so far around access to workforce, giving parents a chance to return to their professions once they have children, regional development, and all those other concerns you've raised. From my perspective, I think the coalition in government and Labor now in government has fallen for an approach where simply increasing the childcare subsidy was going to fix a lot more problems than it really did. We need to focus now more on flexibility, on choice and access for our rural and regional communities, because increasing the childcare subsidy does nothing if you've got no access whatsoever. So our challenge as an opposition is to be collaborative with the government to try and find some solutions there. What worries me the most, though, having been a member of Parliament now for 16 years, is that Canberra is a place where a lot of good ideas go to die. A lot of Canberra bureaucrats will come up with solutions they think will work beautifully, and they may well work beautifully in the suburbs or metropolitan areas, but I can tell you now they don't work in the rural and regional communities. So you need that flexibility if we're going to change the access and provide anything close to universal childcare. So I congratulate Jay and Maddie, and thank you, Jacqui, for hosting tonight. I commit myself as a local member, as a regional member, to working with the government on practical solutions, and also want to encourage people to keep sharing their lived experience, because that lived experience, I think, is far more likely to shape policy directions that will actually achieve an outcome. But I think I'll leave it where I started. We do live in a great nation. It's fantastic we can get together like this and discuss these issues. We need to be hopeful and optimistic that we can come up with solutions, because future generations will depend on our good work now. Good policy work now will shape the outcomes for our kids and our grandkids. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking the ministers for coming along and listening to your stories. It was great to have you here and your responses. Unfortunately, we've had such a packed evening tonight that there's not a lot of time for Q&A, but definitely all of the questions that have been put into the chat, the Thrive by 5 team will gather those up and make sure that they're sent to Minister McBain and Minister Chester's officers for comment. And please, if you think of anything else, please send through those comments in the end. So we might move to wrapping up. There is one last question that we want to ask you through the tool, and that is, what do you see as the biggest priority for our leaders? And if you can just add that into the chat there, I think we've just got that coming up now, just that link. Would be great if we could have that. We have had 90 people online. We did have over 250 people. I think it was actually about 280 people register. So we will be sending the video out to them. I do want to thank you all for participating tonight. It's been so wonderful, and everyone has been so generous in sharing their stories. Again, I'd love to thank Thrive by 5. It's been amazing being a campaign partner. I think the campaign has achieved a great deal of systems change. There is still more work to be done. As we've heard tonight, you know, the challenges are very real for our rural communities, and there needs to be more change, and quickly. So we look forward to some exciting election commitments, hopefully, Minister. And on that note, I would again just like to thank all of our panellists, all of the Thrive by 5 team that have helped kind of put this together in the back end. I wish you all very, very well, and you know, hope we can see some change in these challenges in coming months and years. So thank you very much, everyone.